Wait for it. Wait for it. And we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let the one, the only Dr. Robert E. Hampson, otherwise known as Rob, or Speaker to Lab Animals, introduce himself to our listeners and viewers at home.
Hey, JR, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Yes, I am known as the speaker to lab animals. Robert E. Hampson. I am a medical school professor, and I teach. And I teach my students to get out there and get in front of audiences like science fiction and fantasy audiences, and how to communicate. But I love writing. I've been writing for a long time, and so I like to tell stories.
And you're good at making it more accessible. And we were talking about it in the pre-show. We actually met at the last HonorCon, and I was just there as a guest because I figured David Weber did something right if he built a fan club. So I went just to learn what he did by observing the fans, like what worked, what didn't. And somebody had to go home early, so on the Sunday they threw me on a panel because I was the only person that had a pulse that also wrote, because everyone was going to see David Weber and Larry Correa on the same panel. And you were on the panel. I think it was something to do about cryo freezing and cryogenics and such.
Oh, yes, it was. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah, and how that's used in sci-fi. I was obviously not there for my science. I was just there because they've written about it. You were there to talk about how it really works, and apparently we get it wrong in sci-fi.
Well, we get it right and we get it wrong. The funny part was right around the time that we did that panel. Chuck Gannon and I were talking an awful lot about cryopreservation and cryofreezing, and it was I was trying to dig into how it actually works. I'm currently in a tissue engineering institute where that's part of what we do is I mean, there is a group, that's not me personally, but there is a group that looks into cryopreservation, because sooner or later, if we're going to tissue engineer great cures and fixes and all of that, we're going to have a way to preserve it. And that's not even getting into the idea of how in the world are we going to go 40 light years out to another star without some sort of cryo sleep.
And it's definitely interesting. You mentioned, and I'll throw this offer out there. You said you try to get your students to be willing to talk to normies about the science to keep interest, because I think if people are interested in the science, it's a lot easier for schools to get the funding to investigate those kinds of things when it's less mystical, magical nonsense that you don't understand. When you start get the layperson understanding, I think you get people more passionate about it. I have met some of the most passionate people into science, but they can't understand much past the white papers. The underneath, they got nothing, but they're interested because the knowledge is fascinating, even if you don't know the how.
That's true, very much so. So I actually teach. I teach two courses in the summer, and my students have to go to the Congregate science fiction convention in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, where they will give a 5-minute talk to an audience of science fiction and fantasy fans. And one of the things that they find most fascinating is how interested the fans are in what they're telling them, because they really don't expect to have really good, intelligent questions coming from a non-scientist audience. And so this is part of what we do. They give a 5-minute talk and they answer questions from the audience. And we get good questions, and it surprises the students every year when we do this.
That's the one thing that I regret, is that the public school system makes people hate reading and hate science because they don't teach it in a way that's engaging and relatable. It's like you're going through the formula and we're going to do it this way because that's the way I learned it and that's the way they taught me, and so on and so forth. And there's so much out there that's fascinating to learn. Like they never taught recessive traits to us in biology class, right. But I learned and taught myself because the doctor told me you're colorblind because it's your mom's fault. And I'm like, wait, what? And so I did my own research. And if they had used examples like that were just kind of cool, that were relatable, I mean, I would have been getting A's in science. It was fun.
And that's part of what our young science students don't understand is they try and give a talk and they try and give the language and they use the jargon that they would talk if they were talking to their fellow students or to their professors. And we go through this, the getting them to the point where they give these public talks takes several weeks, and we train them out of things like, well, first you have to talk about the ABCD protein, and then the ABCD protein is going to complex with the EFGH complex, and so on and so forth. And you've lost your audience right there because they don't know what all of those are. But if you say, you know what, not all oxidants are bad, not all antioxidants are good, you then start getting people's attention. That's the sort of thing we like to do, because you're right. We unfortunately beat it out of the students, and we've got to have a way to excite that interest again.
And it's natural, I think, because like we have the Hampton Air and Space Museum in Hampton, Virginia, not too far from me, and you go there, and I've taken the kids there for their science programs, and you watch them outside of a school environment where it's just their curiosity can go crazy, and they're all interested. But somehow when we get them into a classroom, all of that, it's like you watch their soul die when they have to learn it in school. And it has to be the method. And I don't know the right answer. I'm not a teacher, but there's got to be a better way.
Well, there's also a portion of it that you've got somebody that's sitting up in front of a class, and they're sitting here and they've got the book in front and they're reading out of this stuff. And so tell me about these creatures, and what are all of the numbers? And no, you don't do it that way. You stand up there and you catch everybody by eye and you say, 90% of you, if you live past the age of 90, are going to have some form of memory loss. And they go, what? And, you know, past the age of 50, there's probably at least a quarter of you will have some form of memory loss. You got to get in front of the students. And I talk to groups of all ages and all educational background. And it's not always easy, but there are ways to catch people's attention. And if you think about it, if you look at how History Channel and the number and Nat Geo and the like approach historical things, this is why there was this great mystery that occurred at this location right here. And you see these palm trees behind me, and these palm trees were a very important part of, and you catch people's attention. And it's really, it's a lot of it's in the delivery.
That tracks. I know I got fascinated in it. I mean, I've always been a like sci-fi nerd, but the brain stuff until I had the head injury, and then suddenly you want to understand. And because like that's one of the things the neurologist tells you when you go to the Walter Reed Memory Clinic is when you have these head injuries, it's not if you get dementia, but when. The trick is to make that when happen the day after you die because you live a healthy life. Because there are still things you can do for brain health, like
That's
you
right.
know the crossword puzzles, the mid body activities, that sort of thing. And suddenly you care because I don't want to die and I don't want to go demented. So it's like, oh, okay, let me learn.
On the day my father passed away at age 91, we were talking about my son who was going to be driving up to New York City for something. And the two of us, my father and I, with my mother listening, were discussing the highways into and around New York City. And I'm sitting there with my phone, with my Google Maps open, and I'm checking all this stuff. And my dad's rattling it off from memory. That's the sort of thing I want to be able to do.
Same here. And so like it's one of those things where you don't always appreciate how important science is until it affects your life.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, like I've lived through things in Iraq that would have killed us even in the first Gulf War. When I got shot in the chest twice, the SAPI plates that we had, they didn't have that in the first Gulf War, not that style. So it would have punctured. And so, you start thinking about the way science affects you even now, and you don't even necessarily think about it until you start doing retro comparisons to what we do now versus what we were able to do, even 10 years ago. And you realize, oh crap, this really does affect our life.
I saw a lot of that because about 20 years of my research career was working on projects for DARPA,
Okay.
Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, the guys who really did invent the internet. And They uh, and so there were a number of things we always had to do. Again, this whole idea of being able to communicate what we do was important because half of our meeting would be the scientists who were doing the research, and the other half of our meeting would be the performers who needed to actually, or operators who needed to be able to use it. And so that was always a very, very interesting thing because then I'd hear the stories about, yeah, let's have this aircraft carrier do 48 hours of continuous air operations. No, 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 bad idea. Fatigue and sleepless and sleep deprivation make people do dumb things, and so we would and we would start saying this, and then the medical officer who was telling us the story says, "Yeah, I know, right? You know that they didn't know that." So yeah,
Yeah, it's I remember they kept us out. So I did boot camp back in '98. So it's been a long time since I did my OSUT, one site unit training for the infantry at Fort Benning. And I remember they pushed us so hard on that field exercise that I was having trouble staying awake in the field operation when we're, manning the foxholes. And I still to this day have vivid memories of watching my drill sergeant riding a unicorn across the field. I know in the harsh reality of waking up and not being tired that there's no way he rode a ute well unless DARPA invented the unicorn for him. But like it was a hallucination because I was exhausted. I don't even know for sure that he passed me, but I wasn't going to ask because I'd have to admit I was falling asleep. So, but like, you start seeing things and hallucinating after all that time with no sleep.
I
And
can neither confirm nor deny that DARPA deployed unicorns to test the sleep deprivation status.
I believe it. And then the other part is people will ask me, and I do like the experiences from the military. I'll include that stuff at the end of my newsletters. And I had somebody ask us what the scariest moment in Iraq was because I did 2 tours there, and I thought about it and I wrote about it for one of my newsletters. But it wasn't the firefights. It was waking up and realizing that I'd woken up while my driver was driving down the MSRs at the back of a convoy, and not only was I asleep, the driver and the gunner were asleep, but somehow we didn't crash. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was the scariest oh shit moment I ever had. I'm like, holy crap! Like, so that's when we learned the brilliant Army theory of malicious compliance, where we just accidentally broke things when we needed a break, so we didn't have to leave the base we were at. Like, we can't go, Sarge. We don't have the thingamabob. And then we sleep up, and then miraculously it reappears, and we could keep on.
I was accused of that one time when we had a whole series of patients that we were doing a study and something was broken and we kept losing patient data. No, I didn't break this on purpose because I needed a break. No, this was real. And it was only when it happened at multiple sites that we were able to convince the funding agency that it was real.
Nice. I think you're the 3rd doctor we've actually had on the show. So we did Sun Tzu in space. He was a military strategist. He got his doctorate from the War College. Doc Spears, former Green Beret, who was actually a surgeon of some sort. I don't know, medical doctor. And now you. So you're our 3rd doctor that's really a doctor that has the title doctor and not just a medic.
Yeah, the funny part about it is I went to medical school, but I went into research. So I have a PhD, except that in the very late in my career, I went back into a clinical setting. So I do the research in the clinical settings. And I didn't happen to grab one tonight, but I usually wear a Hawaiian shirt when I go into the clinic. So I'm doing a little bit of MASH for the older listeners and fans. And so the, I took Hawkeye Pierce and BJ Honeycutt and Trapper John as my role models very, very early on.
Now, were you always interested in science?
I was interested in medicine. I was applying to medical school, but I did not get in because I have really good grades for science, but not so much for medical school. Back when you want to have everybody be absolutely the top of their list. Unfortunately, the top of the top of the top burn out really young, and that's an unfortunate consequence. But I wanted to go to medical school, be an MD. I got into a research lab and realized I liked that more. So I went into a research program only to find out they tossed us in med school for the first 2 years to get all the coursework.
Oh,
And then when all of the MDs went off to learn how to be clinicians, I went back to the laboratory and learned how to be a bench scientist.
someone's got to do the job.
And it was a fun job. It's been a really good job.
So we'll have to, if you ever want to send any of your grad students here to do their little talks, open too, because we get lots of interest on the sciencey side of things when we can make it engaging. So that's always a popular topic.
Yeah, and actually, I know I've got quite a few. Several of my students have gone on. One, I wasn't really that involved in her studies so much, but there's a blogger who has blogged as Sci Curious and has also gone on to be a science journalist who goes to Dragon Con, goes to a number of conventions, and does the sci-fi and science bit. And several of my students from the course that I teach have gone on and are science fiction fans and are going to be involved. And one of those former students, former postdocs, has just married. And his wife is also very interested in both science fiction and in communication of science. So we'll see if we can indoctrinate her into the world as well.
Educate, indoctrinate, same.
Yeah, right.
All right. So before we go too farther into this, as much fun as I'm having, we do have to do the religion question. So are you ready for this?
I'm ready for this.
All right. Star Wars, Star Trek, or Firefly?
Star Trek.
Okay. What is it about Star Trek that appeals to you?
Gadgets.
Okay.
Yeah, gadgets.
Now, which Star Trek captain did you start with? Who was your first?
I was Kirk, all the way back to Kirk. But right now, my favorite is Pike.
I always liked him. Wasn't he the captain in some of the very, very first season 1 episodes of Trek?
There was a 2-part episode that was Pike, and one of the things I've loved about the new series, A Strange New Worlds, is the fact that they honored that by showing you what happened from a different perspective.
Now, the first episode, I actually liked their away team uniforms more, and it was definitely more in keeping with the movie like Forbidden Planet. I think Disney did that movie. And so you could definitely see the influence.
Yes.
But I also know those uniforms were probably pretty hot to wear under the lights of a camera.
So I've heard. My wife reads all of the behind the scenes stuff. Okay. And yeah, I've heard that a lot. And but yes, I'm a Forbidden Planet fan. I think that was one of the best movies they made.
And I want that robot, Robbie, who can just make gallons upon gallons of booze on request. I mean, as a former grunt myself, I can appreciate that. Like, that was just the coolest thing ever.
Oh, yeah.
And I could appreciate the guy with being so sad that he had to get rid of half of it because he couldn't fit it on the ship.
That's actually part of what made that movie so good, is that it had a depiction of the crew of the ship that seemed real.
Yeah, I remember watching that, and I'm like, somebody knows a little bit about the Navy, but then given when it came out, almost all of them would have had some connection to World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Whether they were civilians or they were too young, but their family was deployed. Like, there's no way, given when it was filmed, because of the scale and scope of World War II on the American populace, there's just no way they didn't have some knowledge that definitely showed in how realistic. So yeah, it was really good, but I liked Robbie the robot. Yes,
Robbie was great. I also liked the running through the caverns, and they had this huge air shaft that was nothing but machines for miles.
Oh, I like that too. That was really well shot. I don't know what angles they used, but the camera tricks for that movie was good given the limitations.
Oh yeah.
So I like Star Wars because it feels more lived in. Same reason I love Firefly, although it went to Fox Entertainment where all good shows go to die. But I liked a lot of the tech in Trek, but it felt like it was a little too optimistic about human nature. Like the idea that we would do things just for the love of it, not for money, and They didn't have currency. I know they later episodes they tended to flush that out a little bit, and I'm told the novels did too. I haven't read any of the books yet. It's on my list to read some of those Star Trek novels.
Oh yeah, no, and valid critique too. I saw something today that said in the Star Trek Next Generation relics, where they end up with Scotty on Picard's Enterprise, that having Scotty be ignored and dismissed is not what would have happened in a realistic universe, because they would have been going, Scotty, you've got Scotty, you've got Scotty, he's the miracle worker.
Yeah, I did like the tech though. I mean, and if you look at it, I think out of any science fiction franchise, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me that's inspired the most technological advancement of any sci-fi property. And how many, scientists have said, I created X because I was inspired by Star Trek.
Everybody talks about flip phones.
Yes.
If you walk up to any building that has sliding glass doors, I read some trivia way back when that a hospital contractor contacted the set director at Star Trek and said, "How do you get your doors to open so fast and so smooth?" Because we're trying to build emergency room doors. And the answer was, we've got two guys behind the set with ropes and pulleys.
The movie magic always impresses. Apparently, when some of the 007 was happening, the one where Sean Connery was the agent, they actually thought that the movie theater had invented the mouth breather that he used. They didn't realize it was fake. They're like, no, we need that for our military. Like, it's not real. It's movie magic.
That is why Galaxy Quest is one of the greatest as well.
Yes, but the cool thing is, so there's a Mexican physicist, Miguel Alcubierre, and I'm probably butchering the name but he invented a theory for warp drive because he was so inspired by Trek. Now the flaw with it is, in order to make the math work, you need more energy than the sun will put out in its lifetime. But if you can account for scaling that up, then it's in theory possible. Who knows? Maybe cold fusion. I've heard all my life it's 20 years away, so maybe that'll be the solution.
Yeah, I work with a group called the Interstellar Research Group, and those are some of the questions we ask. How can we make Alcubierre's math work?
There have been some modern additions to our understanding of matter, antimatter, and all of that. Right. But I mean, it's all kind of guesswork. It's all theoretical. But just the fact that you could come up with an equation that could do something so grand because you were inspired by a movie franchise.
Oh yeah.
And I've heard Shatner talk about some of the conversations he had with Vietnam veterans who were in POW camps. That this is in the early war when they were still doing POW trades. And part of the way they made it through the prison experience and the torture is because they were acting out parts of Trek to keep themselves entertained, which I think is kind of moving. That, it doesn't surprise me that, military guys are nerds. That's kind of the dirty, kept little secret about the military. So, I think it inspired a lot. For all I had some issues with it.
That was incorporated partially in was it Apple TV For All Mankind?
Yeah.
And they had the first crew, 3-person crew on the moon in the first permanent installation, and they were acting out. They had one season of the Bob Newhart show, and they had gotten to the point where each of them was taking a role and they were acting it out. That was their entertainment. When the videotape broke down, they then acted it out themselves.
So my stepdad was in the Navy, and he told me some of the times they were out to sea that they'd seen the same movies over and over again in the first class mess, that they could start reciting the lines. And so at a certain point in time, they just turn the volume off and they take turns playing characters because they were bored. And it's not like it's before they had the internet on the ship. So, they were going to do that or read or sleep. I'm sure there was some gambling too, but he wouldn't tell me that.
No, he wouldn't tell you that part.
But yeah, I like the fact that Star Trek, at least at some level, honored what came first. So like they had Ahura wearing, I'm probably butchering the pronunciation. When you're hard of hearing, pronouncing anything gets tricky. But they had her wearing the miniskirt because it was the 60s, 70s when they were filming, right? So it was just
Right.
signed for the time. And then they're like, oh, wait a minute, that might have been sexist to put the females in that and the men in pants. So in the first few scenes of the episode 1 of The Next Generation, some of the males were wearing the mini skirts so anybody could have worn them, and then it was quietly shelved and never discussed again.
Oh yes,
Which I thought was kind of cool. And there weren't name characters; you just saw someone walking in the background. I wonder if they paid them extra to have to wear that day.
Well, considering when it was filmed, probably yes.
But yeah, I like that they honored where it came from. And we've talked to one of the guests we've had on, CC Akeke, who writes a lot of superhero stuff. Well, now he writes sci-fi too, but he was telling us that some of the history between the actress who played Uhura and Martin Luther King convincing her to stay on because she wanted to quit. She felt like it was not using her acting abilities as someone with her level of training, but they were leaving it because it was the first real integrated scene like that, which
yep.
It's easy to watch now with our modern sensibilities and not realize how groundbreaking some of the stuff we used to watch that we take for granted now was.
Oh yeah, I remember I got special permission to stay up and watch. It was quite different at the time.
Yeah, and the other funny thing that strikes me about Star Trek, but it's almost kind of quaint at this point, is that they never added seatbelts to their seats. So every time something goes on, they can get thrown around. And they made the joke about that in Galaxy Quest about why don't we have damn seatbelts?
Right. You always knew when there was something happening because they had to throw themselves across the stage.
I mean, again, you get the limitations of the period, so that they had to work with what they got. But I do think at some level, acting was a little bit better because you didn't rely on green screen technology. You actually had to be more expressive. So if you look at some of the dramatic movies from the era, like not the campy stuff, just the actual real movies, and you just look at their scale of their acting, I think it's better than some of what we get now.
I think some of it is, yeah.
So. Although we talked to Chuck Gannon, or was it Bill? No, it's Bill Fawcett, I think. We interviewed somebody who was saying that it could be not that their acting is worse, but that we just notice other things more now because of the explosions on the back. It's David Weber's interview. Because of the explosion in the background, you're focused more on that, so you don't even notice some of the other stuff anymore. Also possible, true. Like, a little column A, a little column B.
Right. I would think so, too. The other thing is that it's possible sometimes for the CGI to overtake the acting, and I think that happens as well.
Or the background music. That's so annoying when they put the background music so loud you can't hear them talking, which is especially noticed when you're at home and you don't have the surround sound and then the high-end movie stuff.
I watch all of my TV. I watch all of my TV with closed captions.
I do now. I didn't used to.
Well, part of it is because I'm a night owl. My wife is not. So if I'm watching something late at night, I've got to have the volume down. And then you get to the point where, okay, they're mumbling. I can't tell. Let me run that back, put the closed caption on. Now I just leave it on all the time.
I do that because if I turn it up to what's comfortable for me without the hearing aids, then everyone else is like wincing. I remember the first day that they gave me the hearing aids because I've lost some, like I said, I lost some hearing when I was overseas, and I got back. So I went in, got fitted for the hearing aids. This is the Bluetooth, all fancy and what like is what the VA gave us. And I got back in my car the first time and I turned the radio on. I'm like, oh, that hurts. And I remember I called my mom and the wife and I'm like, I'm sorry. I didn't know, because they put up with it for so long.
I sat next to computers in the laboratory, big computers for way too many years.
Those were loud back in the day.
Yeah. So I have a unilateral hearing loss.
So. Yeah, I've heard that from some people I know that were in communications for the military as well. Those machines were noisy, and if it's not the machine, it's the cooling fans because they're so high speed nowadays. Also noisy and hot. You got to sweat a little bit for your job. So because we are polytheistic here at the Blasters and Blades podcast, Game of Thrones, The Wheel of Time, or Chronicle of Narnia.
Well, since I've not really gotten into Game of Thrones or Wheel of Time, I'm going to have to say Chronicle of Narnia because I grew up with that. And I read the entire series and loved the entire series, and for the most part have enjoyed the movies.
Same in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. The idea that your closet could take you somewhere cool was just like imagination rocket fuel for a young kid. I always felt a little disappointed that mine didn't take me anywhere.
Not to mention, you'd climb into the back through all of those coats, and they were musty as all get out.
Yeah, that too. My little sister was convinced it was because we didn't have the freestanding closets like the Brits had in the show. It's like, we need to get an outside closet, not an inside closet. It's got to be an outie, not an innie, which is the language of children.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, that makes perfect sense, which, at 8 did make perfect sense. My parents, unfortunately, would not go out and spend the money to buy us armoires and wardrobes.
No. Yeah.
So one of the crying shames of adulthood is as we grow up, we stop asking each other the important questions. So thanks to our sponsors, we are bringing that back. And I'm going to ask you, Rob, what is your favorite dinosaur?
I am going to go out on a limb and say my favorite dinosaur is actually the Brontosaurus, the one that doesn't exist. And mainly because I dug into the history of how that happened. And I wrote an article one time about scientists acting badly until about Marsh and Cope, very early paleontologists. And they really played games with each other and were very, very malicious, to the point where the dinosaur skeleton was assembled that did not have a head. And so the museum went and stuck a head on it, and they called it a Brontosaurus. And I don't remember if it was Marsh's dig that had the skeleton without the head, and Cope is the one that came in and looked at it and laughed at it because he knew it was the wrong skull. But so Brontosaurus for me.
Wait, that's not real? I mean, even go to the wiki page, it's got it like it's real.
So the Apatosaurus is real. That's what the skeleton was. It just had the wrong skull on it. And I don't remember what the skull that they used was, but the original terminology of a Brontosaurus was not an actual dinosaur, because it was a combination of two different skeletons.
Oh, okay.
Okay. See, this is the science nerd in me. I got to nerd out on science.
But they have one they're calling the Brontosaurus. Oh, they're calling both the A and the B. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're basically honoring the Brontosaurus thing, but separating the two different animals that were originally in the skeleton. I didn't learn that in school. Yeah. When they taught us, they just taught, when we studied dinosaurs, it was just the Brontosaurus was one on the list because it was North American.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That is so cool. I did not know that till today. Huh. All right. Now,
I say, science nerd stuff.
No, I dig it. I used to have all that stuff memorized back when I thought I would be an archeologist or a paleontologist. And then I realized it wasn't like Indiana Jones, and I kind of lost my way.
Yeah,
I studied history instead. I mean, it's not as cool as the Holy Grail, but we'll take it. The great thing about history, as opposed to like, sociology or science, is everyone that might disagree with you is dead. So everyone else is just guessing with the same information you are. It's a little bit more friendly to to one's ego.
And one of the things that's always fascinating is how in the world do archaeologists figure out that hole in the ground right there was a stove and not something else?
And there's a lot of
guessing.
Guesswork.
Yeah.
After a certain point in time, all of it's guesswork. So, but that's the fun. Like I like that we have some of those mysteries. I found a YouTube channel. I haven't vetted it. It just popped up in my recommendations, but supposedly they found the missing 9th Roman legion in a mass grave in northern Scotland. And they think they solved the Croatoa. It's you from the East Coast and you're in North Carolina. I don't know if you grew up here, but I'm in Virginia. The Croatoa, the Roanoke stuff was like,
oh yeah,
we were taught that from childhood. And the idea that they might've solved the mystery, on the one hand, that's kind of cool. And on the other, I like the mystery because sometimes not knowing is more fun. So I'm going to have to dig in.
Not knowing and getting into long late night arguments with somebody about whether your idea is more correct than their idea.
That is what I miss about grad school and in my undergrad is the late night arguments in the dorms. that you could just, someone's going to be up at 3 a.m. if you can't sleep, and then you can just discuss whatever, everything and anything. And I'm sure we thought we were really smart and philosophical, but we were just tired and dumb.
Oh, I don't know. When you get a bunch of science nerds together, it goes dumb and dumber from there.
I believe it. All right, so we are civilized human beings here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. We are no longer knuckle-dragging troglodytes. So, coffee or tea, and how do you take it?
Coffee with flavored creamer.
Okay, what's your favorite flavor?
Hazelnut.
Ooh, I like that one. That and French vanilla are my two favorites. Although that makes sense because French vanilla is just vanilla and hazelnut.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so me, hazelnut or chocolate and hazelnut. Now I won't call it Nutella, but that's what I usually do is I go get a chocolate mocha and a hazelnut, and I mix the two of them together, and then that's my creamer for a while.
Okay. Yeah, I do the sugar-free stuff that they sell at the grocery stores. I don't remember what brand it is, but I'm not so stupid that I believe that the calorie-free option is actually healthy, but it's not adding to the waistline, even if it's killing my insides. So I'll take what I can get.
Oh yeah, I understand. The problem I run into is that sometimes the calorie-free upsets my stomach. So I'm going to go with all of that rich cream.
Yeah, well, and the cream and the milk and some of the stuff, when I was little that we were taught was bad for us. Now they're like, well, it's more complicated than that. It's not really good or bad. And maybe we weren't totally right on the food pyramid. And so one of the dangers with like the Diet Cokes and the Pepsi uses the same, the artificial sugar, when your body breaks it down, it makes you crave breads, which of course, if you give into that craving, you gain weight because, breads break down to sugar. And
oh yeah.
But I crave breads anyway, so like it's no harm, no foul for me. Like bread's my kryptonite.
I have to say pretty much the same, although more so chocolate for me.
Okay. Now, if you get the rich dark chocolate, that's actually supposed to be good for you.
It is, and one of those research projects that we were talking about earlier, and you were talking about the being half asleep on the road. We were doing a sleep deprivation program, and there was a group that had funding from a chocolate company because they were finding that the very dark chocolates were not only they had enough of the caffeine-like substances to be alerting, but they also had several other substances that were quite healthy for you. But of course, that had to be the straight dark chocolate without any sugar added. And
right.
So you might as well be going back to the old Mayan chocolate at that point.
Yeah. And you can get away with adding some after the effect sugar and still get the benefit. It's just not as, but you got to deal with the results of the sugar you're adding to your diet.
Oh yeah.
I know people that when they're exhausted, they don't do the energy drinks or the coffee or the tea. They go to hot chocolate because it's got more caffeine in it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And I like hot chocolate too. And of course now there's these gourmet hot chocolates that are supposed to have all of the macronutrients that are good for you and good for your sleep and good for your restoration, everything like that. It's tempting. It's tempting at times.
Since I've started, working with a nutritionist and working on getting my health back under control, that's one of the things I know. Some of the people I've met at the gym, the new protein powders, a lot of them are chocolate based now. But like you said, essentially the Mayan chocolate in this purest form, instead of whatever they were using before, they're using the chocolate to flavor it because it's healthier. So you get extra benefits to the protein powder they were taking anyway, which is fascinating.
One of the greatest tours I've ever done on a vacation is to go to a chocolate and coffee plantation. And this particular time I went, they didn't have a lot of their own coffee. We got to see the coffee plants as they were being grown, and we saw a little bit of the process of the picking, the drying, the roasting, the grinding, and everything like that. But the more fascinating part was starting from the cacao bean and taking it all the way through drying and grinding the nibs and making a paste and making our own chocolate drink with that. That's absolutely fascinating.
I actually, I deployed as a junior when I was in college, and when I was coming back trying to get all my credits to finish in time for my bachelor's degree, one of the classes I took was normally for the football players, but it was the history of food. And you go to a lot of the local restaurants, and that's when you realize most of what we think is ethnic food is actually ethnic festival food. So, and the professor explained it as like that would be like everybody in the rest of the world assuming we have Thanksgiving turkey meals every day when it's really just a holiday meal. But as part of that, we did get to learn like how certain foods came about. And I'm just imagining some of these plants, like the brave person who gets the idea, I wonder if I just boil this, what'll happen? Oh, I can drink it now. Like it's fascinating how someone came up with this along the way when you look at the raw material that it started from.
When back from what we were talking about, how it's all in the presentation, that history and learning is all in the presentation. There is a History Channel show called The Food That Built America.
Oh, I'll have
And
to check that out. I haven't seen that.
and the history of it is fascinating. Why did somebody invent ketchup? Well, because as the cities grew with the Industrial Revolution, the meat that you would get from the market was already well past its prime and starting to be tainted, and so you needed some sort of flavoring on top of it to hide that taste. And what you would the catsups that were coming from Europe that were very popular for this very same reason were not particularly sanitary. So um, so H.G. Heinz invented something, and he put it in clear he used a tomato base, put it in clear bottles so that everybody could see how clean and healthy his product was. And so you get little things like that and you go, okay, where was all of this history when I was in school?
Yeah, they focus too much on the names and the dates that you have to memorize by rote, which anybody can look up later. It's more important to know what's important to ask and how to interpret the data than it is to just memorize raw data with no context.
And why did they do this in the first place? Why
Right. And then
why cross the Delaware? Why cross the oceans? Um, why look for shortcuts where there weren't any, by taking the long way around? Things like that.
And then, of course, when you do like historiography, which is the history of history or the history of our understanding of historical events, and you realize at some point in time we made all of the Hessians on that Christmas morning drunk when most of them actually weren't. They were professional soldiers. I mean, I'm sure there were a few, if they were on leave blocks or whatever, that would have been drunk. I'm not saying they weren't. But the idea that all of them were drunk, I'm like, you're actually taking away from what they did and what they accomplished by making them incompetent instead of just telling it as it was. But somehow the myth that they were all, drunk off their gourd permeates.
Yeah. I've got a 36-year-old son who was bored in history in school, in high school. And he is such a history buff that I can give some date, some event, whatever, and he can start telling me chapter and verse of what actually happened. And a large reason for it is because video games and music and the like have all adopted the idea of take a history event and make a song out of it, make a game out of it, make an event out of it. And um, and that's an incredibly good way of piquing interest.
Yeah, and I think there are other ways. Like, are you familiar with the book Ghost Cadet?
I think I've seen it. I have not read it.
So it is a book about, and I read it when I was younger. I'm not exactly sure when it first came out. It was published in 91, so I would have been 10. And basically, and I would have read one of the first drafts of it. The idea of this guy goes and he meets a ghost. It's his age. He's, fatherless. His dad ran off. And so it's just his mom, his sisters, and his grandma who he's visiting the summer with. So he goes to this battlefield to explore. He meets the ghost who teaches him boy stuff, right, that he hasn't learned. But in doing so, he's telling him his story and why he's haunting the battlefield. And you realize that history is just the story of people that came before us. It's not just boring dates and historic events. It's like, Jim, who was just like us, but different time. And then suddenly it's interesting because it's the story of us.
Yeah. And there's a few books that did that way back when, like Red Badge of Courage.
Oh, that's another good one. I read that.
And All Quiet on the Western Front, all of which were more about the person in the battle, not the dry facts about the battle. That's always a good way to capture attention.
And I've read All Quiet on the Western Front in English for English lit classes, and then again in German for my German language class. And I'm glad that I was double majoring in English and German, and taking German, because when I was reading the English version, it wasn't cheating because that was also assigned. Because colleges
Yeah.
have the honor codes, right? Like, you're not going to lie, you're not going to cheat on tests, all that nonsense. Well, not nonsense, all that good stuff.
Yes.
And so I wasn't even breaking the rules, even though I'd already read it several times in high school too. So anyway, we've gotten way off a field, and we came here to talk about your book. So we are going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man, and then we're going to jump right in and selling the books that brought you here, because you're way too fun to talk to. It's going to get us off course if I let it. All right,
That happens to me all the time.
we're going to have you come back for some of our science topics, because those are fun too. And I need someone who can make it fun and relatable, because there's lots of interesting topics that I think would be great, but finding a way to make them palatable as a podcast is not always the same, right? So
Oh yeah.
we're gonna have to book that off air. And for now, we're gonna air that commercial.
The government underestimated the outbreak. The best medicines couldn't stop it. Now, the dead are walking the streets, and they're hungry. Zombie Patient Zero is 9 tales of flesh-ripping, brain-splattering mayhem from Bayonet Books, the boldest name in action and horror anthologies. From deep space to luxury resorts, nowhere is safe. Zip up your hazmat suit and dare to find out how it all went wrong. Zombie Patient Zero, from the deranged minds that brought you Contact This and Storming Area 51. Pick up your copy today in paperback or Kindle.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. So the book we have you is obviously titled of the episode is Across an Ocean of Stars, but it's set in the Black Tide Rising universe. So I think the way to introduce this is, first, you didn't start as a writer. I mean, obviously you're a you're a sci-fi nerd from way back. How did you go from just being a fan of the properties to advising, which is how you transitioned into telling your own stories?
Well, the first thing I usually tell people in terms of where stories come from is that in the year 1999, I was very, very, very sick and spent half of a year in a hospital bed with pain medications that gave me really, really weird dreams. And so out of those dreams come stories. Um, so that's the flip answer. But what actually happened is I started off as a fan of science fiction, discovered the two groups. One is back in the day of use groups, Usenet. We had a group called the Alt Dot Callahans, because I was a fan of Spider Robinson's Callahan's Cross Time Saloon books. And we used to talk, and there were several writers in there, and we used to talk science things back and forth. And as the Usenet user groups faded away, I discovered the Bain Books website and the Bain's Bar, where I started talking more and more to the authors. And a funny thing would happen is an author would ask a question, and it might be something like, how do you make cyanide? No, no, no. Honest, this is for story, not my wife and I are perfectly happy together, but how would you do this in a story? And there would be a few people that would talk and comment in the bulletin board system. And people who knew me or had talked with me and knew what I did, I'd get these questions. Rob, why haven't you chimed in on this? What makes you think I haven't? Well, you didn't say anything on the group. I said, what makes you think I would put that out there in public? And so I started private conversations with a number of people, a number of authors. And there was a point in time as we start coming into the 2010s where I was on the speed dial of an awful lot of authors. Hey, I need a disease. Hey, I need a reason for a person to start having his father's memories. Oh, by the way, he's a clone and he's a superhuman engineered so that he's going to live 250 years old. And I go, have you considered that even if Alzheimer's is fixed, once you get out past 150 years, all bets are off because we don't know what might hit you at that age. And they go, ooh, that's an idea. So I did a lot of this kind of stuff. And then in around about 2012, I got a contact from John Ringo. And I had known John. I'd been on his technical reader group for a while. And he says, I'm writing a zombie apocalypse and my wife won't let them be mystical zombies. They can't be undead. They've got to be some disease. I need to build a disease. Okay. So about 2.5 hours of a Skype conference with the two of us giggling like mad. And he had the essence of Under a Graveyard Sky, of the zombie apocalypse. And so it was kind of neat to be part of the development as that was coming about. And I got to read all of the early books. There's a little story that's told that one of his early readers was with the CDC, read what had come out of that Skype conference, and came back and says, guys, I need you to change something. You've scared us. We never thought of this. You've got to change it. So I got to be part of that. And then I'm sure my name is on several lists somewhere. But when John had run through his 4 books, his baseline for the series, and then opened it up into short stories, I said, hey, I have an idea. And it wasn't until about 2015 that I'd actually had my first short story published. The first one came out of one of those initial contacts where somebody said, hey, I need to figure out how to do some disease. And I came up with a fictional idea. He says, oh, yeah, you like that. You should write it. Then, and then I had another contact. Hey, somebody's putting together an anthology of science fiction by scientists. Okay. And I'd had several of my author friends say, hey, you should try writing this stuff. I said, yeah, but I don't write in that genre. And they say, no, you don't understand. When somebody says you should write for me, you say, how many words, when's it due, what's it pay? And then you sit down, and it doesn't matter if you don't write zombies, you write zombies. It doesn't matter if you don't write ghosts, you write ghosts. I don't write military science fiction. Well, you don't have to write the military. Why don't you write what happens to everybody else around it? And I go, ooh, I can do that. So so starting about 2015, I had short stories. And then I was invited in to write some short stories in Four Horsemen universe, which turned into 4 novels. 3 are out, and the 4th is working its way through the editor right now. And then with Baen Books, I had an opportunity to do a book I was inspired to go into my research field by the book Cyborg, the TV series $6 Million Man from the 70s. And that's what I decided I wanted to do, only to find out that field didn't exist. But through a lot of the research and the DARPA work, by around 2019, it existed. So I said, okay, let me write this, but let me update it. Let me bring all this together, which is my previous novel. And then I was sitting in a panel. I had written a couple short stories for Black Tide Rising and said, oh, wow, I have an idea. Short story, started writing it down, and it got longer and longer and longer. And so I started talking with John Ringo and with Tony Weisskopf, and I said, hey, can I write this novel? And it took a little while to get it worked out. But I kind of fell into the science fiction writing aspect of it, mostly because I was trying to help authors come up with how to fit the science into a story, which meant I was already halfway there to trying to figure out how to write the story myself.
Okay. And then, the zombie one is fun. I used an alien parasite that got into a water supply on an alien colony once. Because, and I got I want to say it's Dan Brown, who did like political thrillers, and he
Right.
hypothesized in one of his books that the what we think of as vampires is actually germ warfare combining rabies with something else. I can't remember what at this point. It's been many years, but if you look at the rabies, they tend to avoid water, and then they're anything reflective might trigger animal brain to think water, so you get your mirrors.
Oh yeah, that would work. Yep.
And then you learn that they actually did, to a degree, use some level of germ warfare, even in animals' time. I mean, they were throwing biological contaminants in trebuchets in the naval wars. So yeah, I like it when people get creative. I mean, and even if you take just a hint of the science, just enough to hang your hat on, it still makes it more believable than just the hand wavium.
And also part of the fun is you can include the scientists and make them having to figure out how to deal with the non-scientific situation.
So, so that's how you started, writing in general, and that's how you got involved with helping writers. How did you get involved with the Black Tide Rising universe?
So again, with specifically with Black Tide Rising, it came about when I was helping John Ringo with his with the zombie virus for the very first book. The other part that happened then is, as John went along and he was trying to find a grand MacGuffin for the series, it came back to, well, what would they have to do in the laboratory to perfect the vaccine? And so we worked through a number of ideas. So at the end of the third book, there is a raid on the London Research Center, and what they come up with is separation gel. It's the stuff you use in chromatography in a laboratory to separate out the different proteins that are being used in the process of creating a vaccine. And because John wanted something that would be, oh, duh, no wonder that's what it is, but they couldn't find it anywhere. So that was really how I got involved with Black Tide, and then coming up with different ideas. And the fact that the universe got opened up with the anthologies for people to write short stories, I loved that part. Yeah, I can come up with a short story for that.
Okay, and then so that's your involvement with the universe, because this is across the an ocean of stars, and we'll throw that cover up for people, is definitely a Black Tide Rising novel. How did you come up with your premise for this specific novel? And I dig, by the way, the Hawaiian shirt on the zombie.
Oh yeah, and there's a little story to that I'll come back to in a minute. But my wife and I travel to Hawaii a lot, and I was sitting on a panel. We were discussing the short stories and that a number of us had written for the anthologies for Black Tide Rising and Voices of the Fall. And I started thinking, I had just come back, my wife and I had just come back from a trip to Hawaii where we had gone to Kalapapa Peninsula, which is the old leper colony. And there's a story of a Catholic priest who ministered to the lepers and brought civilization to a colony that was pretty lawless. And I thought, what would a character like that do with zombies? Particularly because Ringo had postulated there was a very, very, very small subclass of zombies that still had no memory, no higher thought processes. They just didn't have the rage and hunger that most of the zombies did. And so I thought, what would Father Damien do with them instead of zombies? So I had this idea to come up with a short story for that, but realized, wait a minute, Hawaii is an untouched canvas for this series, and there's a whole lot you could do because we've got these space simulations that are high up on Mauna Loa and Mauna Kea. They really exist, and there's in Ringo's books, you saw the boat crews pulling survivors out of the ocean, out of boats that are adrift and off of islands. Well, we've got all of that around Hawaii as well. And then somewhere in the middle of there, I had come across the fact that there's 15,000 head of cattle on the Big Island in one ranch, and that ranch is still only a small fraction of the number of horses and cattle that are on the Big Island. I go, wait a minute. this could be self-sufficient as long as you could keep the zombies down on the coast or down in the old cities. And so I started putting all of this together, and that's really where the story of Across an Ocean of Stars comes from. What's happening on all of these different islands as civilization falls, and then the people fall back on their Polynesian heritage.
So that's the one thing that everyone gets wrong when it comes to Hawaii at the end of the world. So a lot of what we think of as Hawaii falls apart very quickly. The land cannot support the number of people who live there without a constant stream of ocean liners bringing a constant stream of product from the mainland. So you're going to, even if you don't have zombies roaming land, you're going to have a mass die-off anyway, just from starvation. And then the lawlessness that would follow that.
But once you start reducing the population down, you find out that there's an awful lot of resources there, because if you fall back to pretty much just the natives,
right,
the folks who live there year round all the time, there is enough food there, and there's enough variety being grown, and you can build a dugout canoe and fit sails to an outrigger or a catamaran and sail between the islands. And there's fishing, and there's farming, and there's ranching, and a number of other things. But then you do run into the shortages of fuel, you run into the shortages of medicine, and there are a number of things that you would do. But part of post-apocalyptic lore is, how much of this can you get by raiding the pharmacies, raiding the stores, or in the case of Across an Ocean of Stars, what if you knew that all of the containers had been offloaded from the ships, the cargo ships, and are still sitting there in the harbor behind fences, and all you've got to do is fight your way through 50,000 zombies to get to it?
Yeah, that's one of the things. So I did some ghostwriting in the beginning to pay for some stuff, and I've written some zombie stuff. And that was one of the fun conversations. I went up to, I think it was the local Walmart or Kroger, I can't remember at the time, but I talked to one of the pharmacists. I'm like, look, I will take you out to lunch if I can pick your brain for this project. And no one says no to free lunch, right? Like,
right.
And that's one of the things he said that they all get wrong is, one, in the books and in the movies, everyone knows exactly what they're looking for, and they're experts and they can always find everything. He said, what you're really going to find is chaos, because not everything is so cleanly labeled, because it's relying on the knowledge of the pharmacist and the pharmacy techs. And so what really would happen is much like the pill parties of the 70s, where it's just you grab a handful out of the bowl and see what the effects are going to be. That's what most pharmacies would look like after the first clown raids it. And he's like, and the first clown that's going to raid it is going to be a drug addict, not some prepper. Because the preppers by nature are going to be a little bit more law abiding until it's clear that it's broken down.
One of the scenes I wrote in has my protagonist standing in front of a container that has been opened, a shipping container that's been opened, that has pet food and pet toys. And he's looking at it, reminiscing of what they've lost, because one of the luxuries they've lost is pets. Yes, there are working dogs around. Yes, there are barn cats around, but that's it. And and here you have is the fancy collars and leashes, and the doggy raincoat, and the fancy pet beds and stuff like that, sitting in a shipping container, when what they're doing is they're looking for clothing, they're looking for food, they're looking for sundries.
Well, the pet beds could be repurposed to a bed. You stack enough of them in a pile, you got a comfortable thing to sleep on. Depending on the pet food, some of it is
spoken like infantry. Thank you very much. That's very good.
The food could be, well, not all pet food is human grade, but some of it is, and that, of course, that's also probably going to have a shelf life. And that's the other thing is they get wrong, is how quickly the gas goes bad without the power to agitate the tanks. And it's interesting when you start thinking about it. There was a Discovery Channel, I think it was, that did a apocalypse type show, and you got a bunch of people, and in the event of an apocalypse, what can you actually count on, and what could the individuals do? And absent some people with some very specific skill sets, you realize how quickly modernity falls apart.
Oh yeah. Oh, definitely.
And that always surprised me. Like, you need someone plumber to make sure you can keep the sanitation, and you need someone with some sort of mechanical ability to jerry rig a bunch of stuff. So it's definitely interesting. So as we dive into this, what would you say the age range for Across an Ocean of Stars is? If you're going to give it like a movie rating for parents that are considering the universe in this book.
Probably about 15 and up. There are a few military characters with military appropriate language. It is rare, and it is entirely situationally appropriate. But there one of the one of the things I tell people, my books have a tendency to be fairly benign with respect to language and other more adult scenes, because my 92-year-old mother reads everything I write. And so I always have to have this part, okay, what's mom going to think of when she reads this? And as far as Ocean, when I have military characters who are reacting, they're going to react with the appropriate and characteristic language. But especially when they realize that there's more zombies than they thought there were. But aside from that, I would say probably about, I'd love to say 13 and up, but that's not going to work right. So I'm going to say maybe 15, 16 on up. I'm sure that there will be some younger readers who read it and enjoy it, and there are going to be a bunch that don't understand it. But it's there's nothing really adult other than the fact they have to go out there and kill zombies, and they have to fight for their lives.
So two things. Before we start talking about the main characters in the plot of this specific book, we're going to talk more about the Ringo's Black Tide Rising universe and your contribution. So one thing you know about wilderness survival is what the sun will do to cook your skin. And if you've read, and it's, we're recording this on Memorial Day, you're not going to listen to it, dear listener, till June. But one of the things I've watched recently was the Battle of Midway and some of the stories from some of the pilots that were floating in the water for a couple of days before they were rescued, and what the sun did to them as they're just baking in the sun in the Pacific. And so do you have that kind of consideration of what that's going to do for the zombies too? Because in some more temperate climes, it's less of a concern. But you're in Hawaii, you know what I mean? You're in that terrain that we know exactly what the sun is doing in those temperate ranges. So is that a factor in how the zombies work for you?
Slightly. It's a small factor. For the most part, that was covered earlier in the Ringo books.
Okay.
And also, I've got some other considerations, such as the elevation and
Okay.
the oxygen levels at various elevations. But that is a really good question to go back at this cover, because readers of the Black Tide Rising series will know that zombies don't wear clothes. Zombies do not wear clothes, and here we have our character. By the way, this is Larry Vale, and Larry Vale is definitely showing he may not be a zombie, but he's starting to look an awful lot like one. And that's the sun damaged skin that you're talking about, the sun bleached hair, and the erosion that you would get for some person who is already out, who is out in the sun, in the elements, and on the waves out in the water full time. And so what happened is, when the publisher showed me this cover, the first draft of the cover art, I looked at it and said, "Oh my goodness, I know who this has to be." And I just happened to be working on edits to the manuscript that because of some things that came up, and the publisher says, "Hey, would you emphasize this in the story?" And I go, "Yeah, that's fine." And I'm starting to work through this, and I realized that all I had to do was, each time we saw this character, and he goes by different names at different places. Number one, he's always wearing that blue Aloha shirt with the pink flowers. And two, he has this weathered skin and sun bleached hair. And that each time you see him, he's looking more and more decrepit, so that the comment becomes, he's starting to look more and more like the zombies. And it was really neat how it was actually a great opportunity to take the cover art and personalize it to a discrete character that you can point to in the book.
Yeah, in general, cover art is supposed to be eye-catching. It's supposed to sell you the book. It's supposed to give you an idea of what it's about, but not like some readers think to depict a specific scene in a specific book. Now, I know plenty of authors, like you mentioned, who will see the cover art and they'll tweak the print to fit the cover a little more closely. Specifically in like mill sci-fi, you'll see the spaceship they give you, and suddenly you're describing it to fit that a little bit more. But the fact that it happened on accident is just kind of cool. That he accidentally got close to what you were already doing.
Oh yeah, and it's really neat. My previous book, Moon in the Desert, when the cover came out, I had not been quite explicit with skin tone and skin color and hairstyle in my description. And I saw the cover and I go, nope, that's my guy, that's my character. And I just went back and made sure that my descriptions were consistent.
So one of the things about Hawaii that we know, because there was a recent-ish in the last year or two, an incident where they've got the volcano on one of the islands, and you've got the magma stream that's still hot, but it's not very wide, and you'll get some idiots every year jumping back and forth, and one person accidentally fell in and quickly got out. So is that something you factor in? Because I'm thinking tactically, like if I've got that and I've got zombies, why not lead them to their own demise and cure the problem, right? Like tricking them to go into the volcano. Is that something you factor into your story in any capacity?
I've thought about it quite a bit. One of the considerations is for continuity with the rest of the universe. These events take place around 2013, 2014. The best opportunity to have used a volcanic eruption was 2018.
Right.
If I've got an opportunity to do a sequel, you will see volcanic eruption. I will play. This will become alternate universe, and I will play with the dates, and I will update that and bring that forward in time, because I have learned some interesting things, some very personal stories of people who were around, were involved, were caught by the 2018 eruption in what they call the Lower East Rift Zone, which was right in the middle of a residential community. And so
I've seen the pictures. It's horrific.
And I have driven across the lava flows. There's a black sand beach that was formed because of that. And the way it's funny if you get the GPS to tell you how to get there, and it's going, and I'm going, oh well, I've been here before, and the GPS is telling me that it's only 18 minutes away, and I know it's not 18 minutes away, and you come to a stop at a lava flow. And then you have to go around the long way, which now takes you an hour instead of 18 minutes. But you drive across the lava flows, you look at this beach, you can see where the beach got extended, you've got lots of lava, you got all black sand and everything going on there. And it is absolutely amazing. I have not been into the neighborhood because so much of that is closed off because of the cinder cones blocked everything, and the lava flows blocked everything and cut it off. But it's absolutely fascinating to see this, and it's actually kind of weird. I was talking to a person at work who had been in Hawaii around the same time I was, and he said we were on the cruise and we had gotten off and we went to the Volcanoes National Park, and the volcano, the lava lake started erupting again the day we were there. And I said,
the gods were angry.
You are so lucky, because that eruption started the day I left. It was kind of funny because we just barely missed it.
See, I thought the lava flow that the guy jumped over and hurt himself, I thought that was like a permanent fixture. I didn't realize that was relatively new.
The one the guy jumped over is one of the other lava flows. It was down closer to the coast.
But yeah, that's just from a tactical perspective, like it's definitely something I could see survivors trying to factor in, especially if your survivors are the ones that were more attuned with the island. Some of the people that moved there are the super well off, that they basically recreated the cities they left in their new paradise home. And so They don't really learn the lay of the land the kind of way that some of the locals that were born in generationally there.
I have a reader who's been corresponding with me, who lives who lives on the Central Plateau.
Okay.
And he's told me he has thanked me for getting the locations right and for getting the general feel right. And he's been the one who's been telling me the stories about, driving a truck with a trailer down and evacuating people's homes while the ash is falling, and having to dodge, sprinkles of lava here, there, and otherwhere. And so it's there's some fascinating stories. And I've talked to a lot of the people on the islands. We were in we were actually had just we were in another part of Maui uh, right before the fires in Lahaina, and I was on the Big Island when that Lower East Rift Zone eruption was happening in 2018. And so it's really fascinating. And when you start talking with people, you ask them to tell the story, and then you tell them that I am going to write a zombie apocalypse novel in Hawaii, but Hawaii wins, and they get very interesting. They get very interested and tell you stuff.
Yeah, the just from the research I did for some of the post-apoc stuff that I did some ghostwriting for, the smaller islands would actually fare a lot better because that tends to be the lower price stuff. So that's more of the Hawaiian natives that live there and then work on the main island, and so that isn't as densely populated. Now, with your story, is it happening on the main island, or is it inclusive to all of them?
So I actually avoid Oahu. Oahu is so dense, and with all of the industry, the city of Honolulu, and all of the tourist attractions, I figure that Oahu is going to probably be hit the worst. So the action takes place on 3 different locations. One is high on the slopes of Mauna Kea on the Big Island, and then off the coast of Kauai. And then I go to the ranch lands of the Big Island, and we close out down south on the Big Island on the Kona coast. There is an old holy place of refuge where some of the action takes place as well. I have been to all of the places. The For folks who can see my background, that background is off the coast of Kauai, where some of this action takes place. And I've been to the locations where the action really takes place. There's one island you can't go to. That's Niihau, and I factor in the fact that you can't go to it as part of the story as well.
Why can't you go to it? I'm not familiar.
So what happened back when with the last Hawaiian king, there had been several rich families. The Sinclair family was given lots and lots of land by King Kamehameha the Fifth, with the stipulation that most of it would be preserved for preserving the Hawaiian way of life.
Okay.
And one of those was the entire island of Niihau. The Robinson family is the inheritors of the Sinclairs, and they keep it that way. And there's supposed to be something like less than 80 people living on that island.
So they have the best chance of survival on that one.
Well, maybe, but they're not really doing the old Hawaiian way of life. One of the things I found in doing the research is 2 roll-on barges, the landing ship style barges, sitting directly across the channel at Kauai, where they load up with all of the latest consumer goods and barge them over to Niihau. So they're not living a perfectly isolated life and in native Hawaiian style over there. But one of the things I play with is the idea when somebody says, according to the census, there were less than 100 people on this island, and there should be the death rate and the zombie rate and everything like that is, we should have maybe encountered 40 people. How in the world have we killed over 200 zombies on this island? And because one of the things that Hawaii has is a homeless problem. Because there are lots of places to go to shelter out of the rain, out of the sun, and it's not cold enough to worry about, keeping warm at night. And plentiful water, plentiful food, and the likes. So I just played with the idea that there may be a lot more people there than you think.
So one of the things that comes to mind is when I think of mass die-offs is the scavengers, right? Aside from like the rot and all the bugs and such, you're going to get scavenger birds. If you've got zombies that might accidentally walk close to the ocean, potentially some of the sharks could get close enough to eat. So are there zombie animals in this universe?
There are not any zombie animals in this universe. That was one of the things that Ringo had to make a decision early on, that there would not be zombie animals. This would strictly be a human infection. And he also played with the idea that somebody did it maliciously. But this is strictly human, but that doesn't mean you don't have to deal with all of the animals and all of the predator and scavenger species.
Well, if there aren't zombie animals, then that means they're at some level that would imply they're immune to whatever it is, which means that they could potentially scavenge off of the zombies because they're not dead per se.
Right.
So they could potentially eat them. I mean, I imagine at a certain point in decay, the animals would be turned off just from their natural instincts. But up until that point, some of the fresher, as it were, zombies potentially could attract those scavengers. Like some of the sharks that can get in somewhat shallow water, it doesn't take much.
Well, the king in the Hawaiian Islands, they'd have to watch out for the wild boar. So
really, I know that they at one point in time were rampant. I thought they had been mostly killed off.
If you stop the hunting, which is what would happen in the post-apocalyptic, then they're going to have a resurgence.
That's true, and it doesn't take very many of them to do that.
No.
So, do you factor in those scavenger animals, in addition to the wild boars, the ocean scavengers as well?
The ocean scavengers are there. There is at least one scene that is referring to the sharks circling. There's a scene with pirates.
Cool.
And the aftermath of that, there is a reference to it. But for the most part, I'm more concentrating on the people trying to survive.
So let's talk about those people. So what can you tell us about your main characters? Is it one person? Is it many people?
It is many people. A reviewer said this looked like a series of connected novellas. And it is because I was trying to tell it from different points of view. This was not intentionally done as connected novellas, but I'm starting off the point of view of scientists who are in a space simulation high on Mauna Kea, who are simulating a long mission, including part of the simulation is they have to go through communication blockouts. And they go through a 75-day communication blockout, and they find out when communication comes back, there's nobody there because fall of civilization occurred early in their blackout period. So part one is looking at, discovering that what this has happened, and you have people who have all of the technology. It still works. They still have power. They still have all of their stuff, and they've got at least 6 months worth of supplies and nowhere to go. And nowhere they can go, and trying to figure out how in the world they're going to make contact with anybody else. What are they going to do when their supplies run out? How long is everything going to be working? And then we bring that to a close and come to the boat people off of the coast of Kauai, and this is based around the tour boat captains, the fishing boat captains, and their crews from the west coast of Kauai, and trying to make a decision. Do they try to make a go of it on Niihau? Do they try to go back to Kauai, to the lesser populated coast, and start clearing and going from house to house and scavenging for themselves, including coffee, by the way? There's a huge coffee plantation there. And or do they go somewhere that would be a lot more benign, that has a low population, but also a very low infection rate and needs people? That's the former leper colony on Molokai. So then we take a look at those folks, including the fact that on their way to Molokai, they will pass by Oahu and they'll pass by Pearl Harbor and see what happened there. So we'll get a glimpse of what really happened during the apocalypse. Then the final, then the last of these 3-part individual sections now takes us to the ranchers and the ranch lands of the Central Plateau of the Big Island. And the main character there is someone who had come to Hawaii to train for and compete in an Ironman-like event. And so if you've got a guy who's a runner and cyclist, and okay, he can swim, but maybe you don't necessarily want to be in the waters off of Hawaii with the scavengers. But if you've got him in a post-apocalyptic area that's trying to rebuild civilization, what do you put him to work as? Well, you put him to work as a runner, quite literally a runner. So our character is a courier and runner who is helping to put together the communications to have this community come back into back into function. Then final part of the book brings all of the characters together, all of the storylines together with this confrontation at a holy site where one of the beta infecteds, very childlike, no higher executive process in their mental thoughts, but they're trainable. They'll mimic, they'll copy. So maybe, just maybe, they can be trained to care for themselves if you treat them right. And the question is, how do you convince people who have been fighting zombies for a year or more to not treat them as zombies? And so that's the 4th part and the final part of the book. And as I say, all of our main characters from the earlier parts are wrapped into this section.
Now, is the zombie, like, I haven't read the Black Tide Rising yet. Is it communicated through bites like the standard trope, or is it passed some other way? Because I mean, at a certain point, you've got potential infections and how you prevent that.
So the original disease is a very, very bad flu, airborne. And if you walk out into an area where other infected have been, you will be infected. It's the infection hits 98%, over 90% of the population, unless you're totally isolated. So our space simulation folks have to stay isolated because they have no immunity. About 5 to 10% of people die from a very severe flu symptom, but of those who survive, sometime within the next week, the virus mutates. It actually unmasks a second virus that is now the bloodborne. You get it from a bite, or you get it because your virus, the original flu, mutated. If you somehow manage to avoid that in the first place, you can still get bitten and turn into a rage zombie right from there. And that course is that if you survive the first part, but you get bitten, you're going to become a rage zombie.
So at a certain point in time in this apocalypse, they reach a point where the only concern going forward is the actual zombies themselves and not getting infected.
Right.
If you survived the initial flu vaccine or whatever, right. Was anybody immune to that strain of the flu that caused all of this?
The lore for the universe, the story Bible for the universe, does say that there are very, very rare immunities. And one of the things I took advantage of in the story is there is 1 or 2 valleys on the northeast coast of the Big Island where there are visitors going into the valleys risk getting some tropical diseases that the locals are immune to. And so I decided to play a little bit. I didn't go into depth, but play a little bit with the idea that maybe some of these people might be immune, or there may be some resistances here that don't necessarily exist anywhere else that the stories have been told about. So it's still wide open that it may occur elsewhere on Earth. But so far, most of the stories that have been told in this are in the Atlantic Ocean, the Caribbean, and along the east coast of the U.S.
Now, you mentioned that there's potential a book 2 set in Hawaii, but does that mean this, as it is now, as it's published, that it stands alone without requiring that?
Yes, this is a fully standalone The primary characters and the primary incidents come to a conclusion.
So if you were going to write a book 2, would it be the same characters, or would you pick a whole new cast, just the same setting forward?
I have a character who is only introduced at the very end that I might carry through, and the character for part 3, the runner, who works for the ranchers and is helping rebuild the community and acts as a courier and as a runner. I think I'd kind of like to bring him forward into a potential sequel, but the others would just be bit parts. They would still be around and there would be reference to them, but they wouldn't be central characters.
Okay. So new characters, but the old ones don't necessarily go away.
Right.
Okay. Now, your story takes place as the events are happening from day 1 forward, or do you jump in later in the infection?
For the most part, you're jumping into it about 2 to 3 months after it occurs. There's references. There are some very slight, uh, uh, very brief references to day 1, but for the most part, you're seeing it from about 3 months in.
So a lot of the die-off would have already happened. So
Right.
that makes your job a little bit easier from a storytelling point of view.
Yeah.
Now, do you factor? So I'm aware of the space training station on Hawaii. One of the things, if they've actually done some videos about those individuals, because it compared them to the people doing the aquanaut stuff under the ocean, the same cutoff. It's all of its training for isolation in space. Do you factor in some of those old magma tubes that could potentially be used for storage for any number of purposes, given that it's sheltered?
I actually use a cinder cone. Um, the space simulation that I was referring to for my model is on Mauna Loa, and it's sitting at about 7,000 feet elevation. I moved for the purposes of the story. My fictional simulation station is sitting at about 11,000 feet on Mauna Kea. And I used a cinder cone so that they're deep in a cinder cone so that all they can ever see is sky. I also have them on a reverse day night. So during their active day, all they see is night sky. And
And that
that's
would
to
fit with a
stimulate.
simulation. That makes
Yep.
sense from what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah.
Because if you're seeing the sunlight, it kind of might ruin the immersion.
Right.
And then,
Right.
of
Now,
course, their procedures to practice airlocks and such is also going to give them some level of germ protection as well.
right. And they're living at a reduced pressure that is consistent with the ISS and spaceships and space shuttles and the like, but the outside air is thinner, so they would then use they'd be able to effectively use spacesuits. They're in now some of these territories high on the volcanoes look like Martian desert and or rocky asteroid or something like that. And I know they use that for training. So I incorporate that a little bit.
And they've also got the vehicles designed for it because they test out some of the Martian rover tech
Right.
up there. Okay. And if you caught them early in a cycle, then you also catch them when they've got the freshest store of food, which
Right.
is a story point. Do you, when you come back to it later on, do they just fully abandon it, or at some point in time would they potentially use that? And this is obviously a book 2 thing, right? Because you don't want to get spoilers on book 1. Just you thinking ahead, would you have them come back to that, or just fully abandon it once the original crew leaves?
Well, I see it as it still being an effective high tech location. They may be short on supplies, but once they've got full communication, once they come up with how are we going to deal with the fact that we have no immunity, how do we create our own vaccine? How do we integrate with these communities? How do we deal with fuel shortages and the ability to charge batteries up and have communication lines and stuff like that? Once you deal with a number of those issues, they still have fully equipped laboratories, a medical bay, a medical laboratory. You could turn it. And the other thing is they've got communication and computer facilities. So my idea is it turns into a resource, but it's no longer a fully inhabited, full-time residential habitat.
And one thing, because obviously tech is different even 10 years ago in I think you said 2013, when this happens. But this is a government facility, and DARPA has all kinds of shiny technology we don't know about. So you could get away with having, better solar arrays to allow them to grab power that way, and other, technology that might not have been as available in 2013 to the general public.
I cheated a little bit. This is actually a private venture that is actually a cooperative endeavor between a European tech billionaire and the company that he founded that is all sorts of high tech stuff. So I avoided making references and allusions to a certain tech billionaire associated with space operations, and tried to make him very different because I was actually trying to recapture a little bit of the things I read when I was doing my essential research on those space habitats and who sponsors some of these simulations, because there are individual philanthropists and businesses out there that are trying to figure out how in the world are we going to mine asteroids. All right, if we're going to do that, how do we create a simulation habitat to make sure that people aren't going to be at their throats 6 months in, at each other's throats 6 months in.
So and this wouldn't necessarily be your book, but does the universe take into account what happens to the people that were on the ISS?
Yes, it does. That's in book 3. Islands of Rage and Hope.
Okay.
That's in the original John Ringo.
Nice. That's one of those things you think about, because every time I think about the apocalypse, I remember when the USSR fell, the last citizen of the USSR was that guy that was in the space station because nobody told him his country didn't exist anymore.
Oh, yeah.
So he was the last, because he was still serving that government as a employee when it all fell.
There was another consideration when you were talking earlier about the issues with what survives, what can be preserved, what can still be used 3 months, 6 months, a year later. One of the questions that had someone else raised was what happens to the GPS satellites? The GPS system drifts. And so Chuck Gannon's entries into this universe have a section that deals with trying to patch the GPS system so that it still works, because there are still boats out there. There's submarines, nuclear submarines out there that are still using the GPS to navigate and things like that. So
speaking of communication, like one of the things you see if you dig anything about the prepper community is the use of ham radio as a way to communicate, because it's low tech and it still allows you to communicate long distances. Was that something you factored in? I don't know how popular that is on the island, so I don't know if it is even a reasonable.
Extremely popular.
Okay.
It's extremely popular, and my reader friend who lives on the Big Island is hoping to introduce me to the ham community the next time he and I are both on the islands. He is a full-time resident, but he's not there all the time, and he wanted to. Part of what I was going to do in this book was to do more with the ham radio. It will definitely factor into a potential sequel, and because it's the ham community, it turns out to be the most important during an eruption.
Now, the other thing that doesn't get enough credit, or it's done poorly, is the concept of biodiesel. So you could convert some of these engines, because you're going to run out of gas eventually, to run on the biodiesel, and all of the restaurants are going to have fuel that won't go bad as quickly as gas, and you could potentially run for years. If the apocalypse is as bad as this is, because there's going to be lots of restaurants and very few people to raid them of their their old biodiesel from their fryers and such. Is that something you factor in when they're rebuilding this community on the islands?
Not the biodiesel so much as the fact that all through the islands, every single resort has huge propane tanks.
Yes.
And so I factor in the propane tanks.
So without giving spoilers, because this is the hard thing is, I get all the questions and I don't care about spoilers, but a lot of our listeners are like, hey, JR, shut up. You're ruining it for me. I want to find out myself. Is there anything else about this book or the series that you think readers need to know before we bring this to a close?
Yeah, there is one thing, and that is that one of the things that I'm in a position to do, again, because I decided to take on part of the story being, what do you do with the betas? And partly because I've got this isolated community of scientists. One of my characters is highly, highly offended at the idea of essentially grinding up the zombies to make the vaccine, which is something that is that's not a spoiler. That's not a secret that that's what they do, because it's something that's been talked about from the series from day one. And he's highly offended at that. And when it comes down to the question of how do we handle these beta type infected, again, it becomes an ethics question. So I had an opportunity to build two concepts in. One is the ethics question of how do we handle this? How do we handle the infected? How do we handle making a vaccine? Do we do the easy way of harvesting live tissue and grinding it up, or do we do it the hard way in a laboratory over many, 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 many months, if not years, to create the vaccine in that way? And how do we handle the betas? What are the ethics of dealing with the zombies themselves? There's also and so that's something that will come full circle in through the course of this book. The other is that one of my characters is basically creating what he refers to at one point as letters in a bottle. He's writing letters to somebody, and I'm not going to tell you who, because that is one of the great reveals. But he's writing letters to somebody, so there has to be an element of hope and faith, which is to say, we can do this. We're going to survive. We're going to get better. We're going to rebuild. We're going to restore. But it is a personal challenge for him, for this one character, and he's one of the ones introduced very, very early in the book. So I've got a couple of arcs in there that I hope the readers feel they pay off for them. I've had a couple of people tell me that great reveal at the end really got them, and so I say good, because that's what I wanted to do.
Now that's actually they've done some experiments with rats, and so in one of them they throw them in this jar, essentially this tube of water, and then they let them fit, and then eventually they drown, right? And then they get another one. It's every so often when they're right about to drown, they pull them out of the water, they recover, feed them, then they put them back in the water, and they find that just the hope that it's going to come back and save me again. And I get animal testing ethics. But the experiment has happened, and it does prove, even at a biological level, the X factor that hope is to survival.
Yeah, it's also a species thing, because one of the things we find, that's actually a stress that is done and to study effects of stress.
Okay.
Rats will swim. Mice will not. And so when they give up, they float. By the way, it's not so much that they drown, at least not right away. When they give up, they just sort of drift and float, and then the experimenter will see that that's happening, go ahead and pull them out. But there's a time function. How long did it take them to do that? If the rat swimming can occasionally touch the bottom of the container. If they stretch their feet out to the most, they can't stand up on it, but if they know it's there, they will swim longer. And so you're right. There is a you and humans do this too. We have to see that there is some reason to believe that you're going to get through it. And so that factors into the story.
And for some humans, it doesn't even it doesn't even necessarily have to be tangible. For some people, that's faith, right?
That's faith.
That's enough.
Yeah, and that's the exploration on the Bain website. There is a prequel story, and you've got two characters asking about this. Do you really believe in that faith stuff? And the other one says, I have to. It's the only way I can keep going on.
So there's another, and this isn't a question for you. You've probably seen it, but I want to say it's the History Channel did the documentary series Life After People, where they explore what would happen. And there's just a hand wavy on, boom, someone snaps their fingers, humans are all gone. What happens to the planet while we're gone? And that's, if you're interested in apocalyptic stuff, dear listener, I suggest you check it out. And you actually find, when you talk about pets, some of the breeds of animals that we have as pets just aren't sustainable or functional in a world without humans pampering them. And so much like pigs released in the wild will turn into boars, you essentially get mongrel medium-sized dogs out of most breeds. You do.
And you find that, even as it is now, we see deer in urban areas. You've got raccoons. In my area, I've got, well, actually not in my area, in my mother's area in San Antonio, Texas, in a very, very heavily populated area. She got a fox running around the neighborhood. And so a lot of these animals, they'll proliferate, then they'll fight over territory and resources. But yeah, you're going to see a lot of supposedly wild animals in the cities fast.
All right, and that's interesting. In fact, I think we're going to have you back for a fun talk. We've talked about some post-apoc topics, but one of the ideas we had in the future was with experts to actually evaluate what happens, because people underestimate what survives and overestimate on other factors. And I mean, just something as simple as like what a plumber could do to prevent disease, outside of the apocalypse disease. And so that might be a fun back. But since we can't go any deeper into the story without spoilers, this is the part, dear listener, where I remind you to please be kind and speak your mind on the reviewing platforms. Your reviews help the right readers find the right book. So do your part. It really does make a difference. And with that, Rob, how might they find you on the wild, wild interwebs? And as usual, all of your show notes will be all of your links will be in the show notes.
So I have a number of conventions coming up. I'll be at the LibertyCon convention in Chattanooga in late June. Mid-July, I'm at Congregate, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And then I will be at DragonCon Labor Day weekend in Atlanta. Now, at DragonCon, I am a regular participant in the Apocalypse Rising track, where we talk a lot about what you just mentioned. What is life after humans look like? What does the world after humans look like? What is life after a population restriction event look like? Then after that, I have PCon in Dallas area, late September. And in October, I get to play both the fiction and science side with the interstellar research groups. We have a biannual, symposium, and I will be doing a little mixture of science and fiction at that one as well. So I got a busy few months ahead of me.
And we're definitely going to link up about having some of your grad students too. I think that's the hard part. When you want to do the sci-fi side, it's easy to get people together to talk about, fairies and elves and whatnot, because it's all made up. So if you're wrong, I mean, well, that's your version of it. Science, though, there is a right and wrong.
Yep.
So making that interesting as it pertains to the sci-fi we know and love sometimes takes a little bit more expertise. So I'm definitely going to reach out and see if we can't get some of your students.
I'd love to come back and talk about any of these type of topics. It'd be an awful lot of fun.
All right. And dear listener, you can find us on our Linktree, linktr.ee, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast. Again, Linktree/Blasters and Blades podcast, where we link to all the things, the BitChutes, the Rumbles, the YouTube, the TikToks, the Twitters, the Spotify, the Discord, the Blasters and Blades Facebook group and Facebook page. We have our email, Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com. Again, Blasters and Blades podcast at gmail.com. For professional purposes only, people. Save the shenanigans from Adam Stabby Stab over there on the Instagram, Twitter, and the email. I promise they are alive. They're just working really crazy right now with everything that goes on with the border. I think the government forgot how many hours in a day, and they're making him work more. I don't know how they did it. Space-time continuum. It's government math, people. But Nick is overworked. I'm trying to come up with one of his only day off if we can do a movie review, something, because he misses you guys. You can support the show by going to buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Again, buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section this is for the podcast, and I promise I will keep my co-hosts duly caffeinated. They will drink that coffee brand coffee till it pours out of their eyeballs, people, and then we will swim away on a river of Java goodness. And with that, if you use the code PODCASTGRUNTS, link is in the show notes. You get 10% off. We get a little bit of a kickback. It's a win-win. It helps keep the lights on. And so with that, I would like to thank you for spending some of your precious time with us. For my crazy and temporarily absentee co-host, I am J.R. Handley, and this was the Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week at the same time, where we'll indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, and all things that go boom. And with that, thank you for coming on, Rob. This was a lot of fun.
Hey, thanks for having me. I mean, I've known about your podcast for some time. Great having an opportunity to talk with you.
I don't know why we didn't do this sooner, but I'm glad we did. And with that, we will hit the end button. People, don't cuss yet. Wait